Hello, I'm Denise Jorgens, Director of International House. John D. Rockefeller Jr. believed that if American and international students could live, study, and work together in a multicultural environment, they could both build friendships and global understanding. In 1932, he gave that belief life at International House at the University of Chicago, which is today one of 20 members of the International House's worldwide network. Today, across the network of International Houses worldwide, and thanks to all of you, 8,400 students and scholars are in residence annually, representing more than 125 nationalities, of which over 700 students now receive scholarships. As director and as an International House alumna myself, I am fortunate to have the opportunity to witness firsthand how the iHouse student life experience and our public outreach programs, including programs such as our Alumni Weekend activities, contribute to transforming people's lives for a better world. Alumni and other donors can ensure that International House continues to serve as host to the world well into the future. I want to thank you all for joining us today for our Alumni Weekend at Home celebration. We hope to be able to welcome you back to campus and to International House for next year's Alumni Weekend programs. And now I would like to introduce Professor Craig Futterman to begin today's program. Craig Futterman is Clinical Professor of Law at the University of Chicago Law School and Resident Dean of International House. Craig?
Hey everyone. I have the privilege of welcoming Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller, sociologist, criminologist, social worker, author, who teaches in the Crown Family School of Social Work Policy and Practice at the U of C. Same place he received his master's while serving as a chaplain in the Cook County Jail. Before returning to U of C, Dr. Miller was an assistant professor at UMichigan in Ann Arbor School of Social Work, been a member of the School of Social Science in Princeton, a visiting scholar at Dartmouth and UT Austin, and a fellow at the New American Rockefeller Foundations. He's won numerous awards for his teaching, mentorship, scholarship, and service. Received his PhD in sociology from Loyola, master's from UChicago, and bachelor's from Chicago State. His work on race, poverty, and crime and social welfare have been published in more scholarly journals than I can even begin to count. And in addition to being a teacher and scholar, Dr. Miller is a child of the South Side of Chicago, former foster kid, a husband, father, brother, grandson, and an all-around great human being who's all about justice. This afternoon, we're going to have a conversation about his incredible new book, Halfway Home, Race, Punishment, and the Afterlife of Mass Incarceration, which is based on his 15 years of research and practice alongside people who've been locked up in America in this age of mass incarceration. For those of you who have yet to read it, every minute you wait, you're messing up, because as heavy as it is, it's also just so beautifully written, and it's worthy of many awards, which undoubtedly will come. Please join me in giving a warm welcome at iHouse to Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Futterman. Craig, wait, do I have an echo? Do I have feedback?
You sound good.
I sound good? Okay. Well, this is a great pleasure. this is a great pleasure. I'm so pleased to be with you. For some reason, I'm hearing feedback. I'm gonna, but okay. Let me turn this down. I sound clear to you, right, Craig? Okay, great. All right. All right, we're good to go. Thank you. All I say thank you. Thank you, Jorgens, for the invitation. Thank you, Craig, for engaging with me in this conversation. I'm looking forward to diving into the book.
Yeah, well, so good afternoon, Professor Miller. And I got to start with just damn. Thank you for writing this book. So beautiful, so powerful, so necessary. Thank you for doing this, and thank you for the work that you do. And I guess I want to start with this. I love the title. It's fire, just fire. Halfway home, race, punishment, and the afterlife of mass incarceration, in particular, the not so metaphorical afterlife of mass incarceration. I mean, you got beautiful and horrible at the same time. And I wonder if you just break it down for us. Halfway home, race, punishment, afterlife, and mass incarceration. Tell us about what you're thinking when you landed on this title.
Yeah, happy to. So just let me check one more time about feedback, because I saw that there was a note that there was some feedback from me. I unplugged the microphone I was using, and I'm hoping that solved it. Is there still feedback, or are we good? Good?
Good to me.
All right, let's go. All right. Okay. So the title Halfway Home. So it's on the one hand, on the one hand, there's the halfway house itself. And so I spent about Jessica Wilson says I'm good now. Thank you, Jessica. So on the one hand, there's I spent about 3.5 years in halfway houses in Chicago, largely on the west side, but also on the south side. And so the halfway house as a place where people find respite. And on the other hand, there's the idea that people get stuck. I mean, so a lot of what we've come to talk, the way we've come to talk about people who've been released from jails and prisons is in a framework of a form of diminished citizenship, second-class citizenship. They've come to embody kind of second-class citizenship, something that's diminished, something that's a constitutional contradiction. And I think that there's something to that. I think that what we've done is we've inaugurated an alternate legal reality for people with criminal records. And so there's something like 45,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that prevent people with records from accessing jobs, from housing, from participating in civic life in ways that most people find meaningful. And so the legal apparatus that we've made has made it so there's really no place for people to go. So on the one hand, there's the metaphor of the halfway house, the need for respite, the kind of in-betweenness. On the other hand, there's the literal condition and the metaphoric condition that people find themselves in, where we've made it so that there's no home for them. They never quite make it home, ever really, once released from jail or prison.
Damn. Well, I want to back also just situate you in this too. One of the things you poignantly wrote was, I'm as close to the subject of this book as I am to any member of my own family. And I guess part of what I wanted to ask to begin with also is how it feels to write something that's so central to who you are, about just, I know how I am, but how you feel about sharing so much of yourself and your own personal life publicly in Halfway Home.
Yeah, there were some things that, well, how do I feel about it? I felt, I feel good about it. I feel like it was the right move. I feel like it was the right move for this reason. I mean, if I was being honest, I would have been in my motto. I was born after 1972 into what we might call a mass incarceration generation. I was born poor and Black in this city, on the south side of this city. And so I started this work as a volunteer chaplain in 2003. From 2003 to 2008, I was at the Cook County Jail, sitting with men, moved mostly by an ethical impulse. And the thing that I kept seeing was my neighbors, like my literal neighbors. I'd see people when I went to the store. I'd see people who I knew from my neighborhood who would be arrested, who would come and spend time there. So when I got to graduate school to study mass incarceration in earnest, because I was concerned about the demographic profile of the jail and prison. I mean, 80% of prisoners in Cook County Jail look like me. You know, they're Black people. Again, people from my own neighborhood. And I wanted to know something about how something like this comes to exist. You know, what is it? What produces mass incarceration? What we call mass incarceration, which is the targeted incarceration of groups at such a scale that we no longer arrest individuals, but we're arresting now whole social groups in ways that are unprecedented. And so the dramatic increase of incarceration and arrest beginning in 1972 for 27 straight years, we arrest more people at a greater rate each year for 27. Anyway, and so I'm born into this mix. But when I get to graduate school and I start to learn the tricks of the trade as a sociologist, I'm taught to distance myself from that truth, from the fact of that, to write from a distance. Well, that's valuable. Writing from a distance teaches you some things. You know, you learn to question taken for granted presumptions. You learn to treat things as alien, and therefore you look at the newness of things. So if I treat a situation as if it's new, I start investigating things as if it's new, and I ask questions as if I know nothing about it, and then I learn things that maybe I might overlook if I were too close. But you also miss things. You miss what it's like to know something about a social situation. You miss what it's like to be moved not by a set of ideologies or a set of theories, but by muscle memory. You remember what a smell does. You know what it's like to sit across the table. You know how your stomach feels when your loved one who you've come to visit is marched away in chains. And it's from that place, from those feelings, from that experience, that you're able to do two things. Thing one is to connect with people who are going through something not the same, because people have very different experiences than I had. I've never been to jail or prison myself, but because I know what it's like to love someone who's been to an American jail or prison, this is a point of connection. I know my own pain. So in not distancing myself from my own pains, I'm able to connect with people who are in pain, even if those pains are different, even when those pains are different. That's part one. Part two, so it's a point of access. And then part two, the place where I ask my questions become different. So now the conversations we're having are completely different. Man, what was it like at that? It's not tell me about the visit. It's I watched your face when you paid for that $5 hamburger out of that vending machine, because I knew what to look for, by the way. So I want to talk to you about that for a little bit. Tell me what it was like for you. Let me tell you what it was like for me. Tell me what it was like for you. And so our conversations are different, and it leads me into different areas of their life, areas that social scientists either did not discover before or didn't care to share.
Yeah, and you devote actually an entire appendix to your book really about this, about what you call the gift of proximity, right? And that's one of the things that I saw you arguing, that, you know, that developing empathy as an ethnographer is just not good enough. And what you strive for, something that you call in sociology, the sociology of what? Being together, bringing folks, being together with the folks who you're studying and walking alongside them, right? And you ask, you know, ethnographic researchers, despite good intentions, right, whether, you know, especially when writing and explaining non-white people to white people, wind up replicating the very power dynamics that they're seeking to study and challenge. And I guess I want to ask you the same thing with everything even that you just said a second ago. So even as a Black man, as you said, who grew up poor, age of mass incarceration, even as someone who is not writing about them, but about us, how you avoid, you know, and feeling that pain, observing, knowing what to look for, how do you avoid still replicating those kinds of power dynamics? You're still Dr. Miller, the sociologist, too, right?
I appreciate that so much. I appreciate that so much. What I tried to do I tried to do two things. Thing one was not explain, not spend a lot of time explaining. I tried my best not to explain too much. Toni Morrison talked about that. You know, she talked about writing, you know, basically books about Black people, largely to, I think her target audience was Black women. And so she's writing not to explain. She's just telling a story. And a lot of what we spend time doing is stopping and making sure everyone follows along, which is good. The practice of translation is sometimes necessary if we're talking about complete alien societies or something like that. You know what I mean? If we're talking about landing on Mars or something like that. You know, but what I tried to do is just write as a human being in the middle of a situation, and not explaining the situation, but describing it, which I don't think is the same thing. Like I not to stop and constantly translate. So that's one thing. Following Toni Morrison. The second thing I tried my best to do was to remember that the tools of the trade are always working against an authentic connection to the people that we study. I mean, we call them subjects. You know what I mean? So it's always working against an authentic human connection. It's telling me that the authentic human connection taints what I find. It introduces. It's telling me that the connection is biased. It's telling me that the connection is partisan. I don't think that's necessary. One, I disagree. You know, and two, I just have to remind myself that I had to stay vigilant that the tools of the trade that were taught to produce this distance, what I call a sociology of being together, isn't the same thing as empathy, because empathy is important and it's valuable and it's wonderful, and we need to develop much more of it. But the most popular version of what we might call the empathetic imagination is the ability of the person to put themselves in the shoes of the other, you know? And so critical theorists have talked about this as projecting yourself into the other, you know? The problem with this is that we're trying to develop empathy about the other, and we're doing it from the position that we occupy, which almost always is the position of, quote, the normal person. You know, the scientist, the generalist reader, the scholar, the student, the not this person. This person is alien to my experience, which means that it's mitigated by my position in the social world. So my maleness, my Blackness, my heterosexualness, you know, my political orientation, whatever the thing is, the fact of me being a sociologist, that's how I'm experiencing the world through these positions. And so I can only project as far as I can imagine from this place that I've staked out in the social world. Well, I think that's wonderful, and we need to do more of that, but it's limited. What I'm asking people to do is instead to get in touch with themselves. So instead of ignoring the self and imagining from this position, this unspoken position of who you are, get in touch with who you are. Get in touch with your pains, your joys, your sorrows, your happiness. And just like a friend who comes to sit with you when someone you care about dies, this has happened to most of us. You know, the good friend who's come to sit with you may not say a word. They may not say anything, but they're there. And they're there in the fullness of themselves. And they learn to listen. And the best of friends learn when to share, what to share, how to share, when it's appropriate to share, and when to just shut their mouths. They know how to be with you through the horror of it all. That's what I'm asking us to do, to walk alongside, to be together.
I hear you, and you know, one of the things that you said, and also one of the things that feels so that feels different in such a positive way. And I'll say this also as a law professor, I often talk and teach students about, it's all about perspective. And it's something I guess I'd like you to talk a little bit about with us too, which relates to what you were just saying, perspective and your methodology, because among the things that felt really different critically different when I was reading Halfway Home from the work of many other social scientists and artists who have written about and researched Black folks is perspective. So many of the stories and research about Black people in America are presented as seen and understood by white people, even the most empathetic white people, and produced largely for white audiences. And unlike a lot of that work, the perspectives of Black folks who've been locked up in cages and those of their loved ones provide the lens from which you wrote. You quote beautifully James Baldwin: if you want to know about the nation's system of justice, go to the most unprotected. And then what you just said, listen, be fully present, be fully there. And I guess I'd be grateful if you talk with us a little bit about perspective and the conscious methodology and research for the book, to expand on that just a little bit more. Because I think it's so critically important and so different from so much of what else I've read, notwithstanding the hundreds of folks who've critiqued objectivity and critical distance and stuff in social science.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you for that question. So I took James Baldwin as a muse when I wrote the book, and also Nina Simone, who in her powerful work does that. You know, she brings you. I'm thinking about, you know, her song specifically, you know, "The King of Love is Dead." You know, when she's writing about the death of Dr. King, and this is after she tells the people, you know, there's a live version of this where she tells the people that they need to be rioting, right? Like, you need to take up arms. What are you doing? They killed the King of Love. But what she does so beautifully, so powerfully, is she brings us into each moment. You know, whether she's and you sit in that moment. You're with them. You know, you're with Sinnerman. You understand what it's like to sit at that dock and watch those women pass by and sea lion women. You know, you feel it. There's a pulse. There's a beat. There's real beauty in all of it. And what I tried to do is I tried to take seriously two things. So one, that people know what they're talking about. You know, so the people I'm talking to know what they're talking about. You know, that doesn't mean people don't lie. People lie and dissemble, you know, all sorts of things. Of course they do. But, you know, I'm talking to people about their lives. I want to take seriously what they say. And I want their voice to be prominent and not mine. And even though I show up in the book, and just to say a little bit about how, you know, my brother's been locked up. I have a father who did 20 years who I didn't know very well. And I write the book as I follow family. So what I try to do is, when it's relevant, when a place of where there's a moment in my life where I'm caring for my brother during the research process, which is when he got locked up, and it matters for the story, I try to share it. And I try to share bits of my life that matter for helping us to understand the narrative in that chapter, in that moment. And of course, the general narrative of the book, what's in service of the story. But the point is that I show up because I think I have to relay the story in a particular kind of way, but only when I have to, because, you know, the book's not really about me. The people know what they're talking about. The people know what they experience. The people who I followed are analysts and theorists and researchers in their own right, and deserve the respect. They deserve to be on the page with dignity and in their fullness, including in their problems, in the challenges that they face. They deserve more than a wooden image of who they are. They're not good or bad people. They're fully human participants in a human community. And what I tried to do is reflect that in the work. But that comes from the part two of the answer, which is it comes from a Black intellectual tradition that takes seriously the intellectual contributions from multiple kinds of people across the spectrum of actors. So the Black literary, the Black intellectual tradition sees James Baldwin and Nina Simone as a social theorist in the same way that it sees Foucault or Bourdieu, or like, name your person, you know, the holy name of Max Weber or something like that, like name your person, right? Like so if Baldwin is a social theorist and Nina Simone is a social theorist, Nina Simone is giving us a theory of rejection, by the way, which animates the chapter Sinnerman. And so if Nina Simone is giving me a social theory of rejection, and so too is the eminent psychologist Geraldine Downey in that same chapter, they're in conversation, because the Black literary tradition doesn't draw the same distinctions that traditional social science will force me to draw. And so in holding true as I can to what I understand that tradition to be, if James Baldwin's a theorist and Nina Simone's a theorist and Foucault's a theorist and Geraldine Downey's a theorist and I'm a theorist, then so is Ronald in my book, the brother who did 27 years on a wrongful conviction. And so is Martin, the brother who was arrested for having 3 crack rocks in his pocket. And so is Youssef, the community organizer and Black revolutionary who's doing important work, political work in Detroit. And so is Yvette, the sister who was arrested through entrapment, through what we might call entrapment today. If we had a good lawyer when she was incarcerated, and on and on. And so is Sabrina, who lives in an apartment that has wolf spiders, and whose landlord tells her, "You're lucky to have a place to stay. You have a record. You're lucky I rented to you." You know, and so these folks are social theorists too. If I take what they have to say seriously, and if I foreground it, if they're not a footnote, I'm saying this. I'm not saying this quite the way I mean it, but I do mean it this way. We footnote the social theorists, but they're so present. You know what I mean? So like the social theorist, Bourdieu is footnoted, but Bourdieu is so present. Bourdieu is animating the way we write and think, or name your person. Weber, Marx, you know, whoever you're drawing from. You know, like name your person. They're in a footnote, but they're so present. So then why can't she be present too? Why can't how she thinks and understands the social world be present as well? And so what I tried to do is take all these voices seriously, including my own. I have something to say too, you know, and so that's the perspective. It's a multiple perspective, and so there's no stars of the book. Like, I'm not a star, my brother's not a star, Ronald's not a star. There's some people who show up more often than others in the to tell the story, and history is a star. There's history in every chapter of the book because you can't understand what it's like to be one of the brothers who I spent time with as a volunteer chaplain, who I'm telling their parent died, who I'm helping through what it means to get HIV care, who I'm referring to a drug treatment facility. You can't know what it's like to be in the Cook County Jail and be them without understanding the 3 expansion projects that the Cook County Jail is, the patchwork of buildings that make it what it is, the position of the judge, the seat of the judge. Something about mass incarceration in Chicago gets me Philip, who gets a 77-year sentence when I meet him in the introduction. You see what I'm saying? So it's like taking these things seriously and not weighing one more than the other in the service of the larger narrative, which is trying to understand the very present history of people moving through these very punishing systems.
Yeah, I want you to stick with Nina Simone just for a moment. I can't help it. She was one of the people who were powerfully present. And as you said, you began a chapter about rejection, right? With Nina Simone's incomparable rendition of Futterman. Where you gonna run to?
That's right.
So I'd like you to bring, let's take some of the folks there with us and tell folks about that.
Sure. So that chapter, this is chapter 3. The chapter is called Futterman, and the way the book is divided into 3 sections. Debt, wage, and salvation. And so at the end of the section on what I'm calling debt, or what people take on, the moral obligation, the responsibilities that people take on, that the people are made to take on when they're accused of a crime. At the end of that, there's a chapter called Futterman, which is really about the social conditions that we've made, but also the kind of person that we produce. And what Nina Simone tells us so beautifully in that beautiful song Futterman, and she tells us a story about rejection where Futterman runs to the rock, the river, the sea, even to his God, and he says, "Please help me, please hide me, Lord." And God sends him to the devil, says, go to the devil. And of course, in that song, the devil is waiting. The devil is always waiting. The devil is always lurking, because there's no amount of torment that will be too much for Futterman. This thing that we've produced, this thing of a man that we've made, this new social category that we've produced, whose punishment will never end. And so when Futterman runs to the devil, when Futterman gets there, Futterman cries out, "Power, power to the Lord." And my interpretation of that is not this being an act of worship; it's a statement of fact. Futterman recognizes the position that he's in, the predicament that he's in. And it's interesting, Cinnamon, through the whole time, through all this rejection, every time he hits a no, the rock says no. Rock speaks, says, I ain't gonna hide you. The river boils, the sea bleeds, all these places that have jobs. Cinnamon is constantly talking back. What's the matter with you, Rock? Can't you see I need you? You have a job. You're a rock. You hide things. Things crawl under you, But so Cinnamon is always responding. He's not a passive recipient of punishment, and neither are the brothers and sisters that I follow. This label that we drop on them: ex-convict, convict, ex-offender, ex-felon, felon, prisoner, incarcerated person, and all these rules, the 45,000 laws, policies, and sanctions that we've rolled out, that hem them in, that trap them in their home communities, that extend their punishment, though we don't call it punishment in a legal sense, because the law doesn't consider these rules. These are things that better than me. This isn't considered formal punishment. This is something else. Everything rejects this person, but this person resists at every turn. And so it was a theory of rejection that I understood from Nina Simone, sitting with her as she told this story, what felt like to me, but what I'm sure everyone feels like to them when they're sitting, in their living rooms watching the YouTube or listening to this beautiful rendition. But this is a part of the tradition. The tradition allows me to take seriously what Nina has to say about social life in the social world.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, that we've created this this status of Cinnamon, and one of the things that made me think of, and this may be too old a reference, but it made me think of Peter Tosh, who sang a transgressive version of Cinnamon. He flipped the script. It was down oppressor man, where you gonna run about the oppressor. It's about the oppressor having nowhere to hide from the things that they did, that God won't take your bribe, your money can't buy your way out of this. But I guess let me try this. Let me enter the 21st century, because I'm just showing my age here with the professor. But how about, and I wonder if you watch this, how about Jordan Peele's time and identity bending HBO series, Lovecraft Country? Did you happen to watch that?
I did.
Right. And so then is that we were fans too, and the show closed most, if not all, episodes with Nina Simone singing Cinnamon. And I'd like to think that Jordan Peele and the writers and producers had Peter Tosh's transgressive down-presser men in mind, that they were referring to some of the crazy white racists in the show who couldn't hide from the judgment of God. But Jordan Peele could have also been referring at the same time to the leading Black characters in the show, who, no matter how much aspects of reality in the show got bent, they still had no refuge from racism, no rock, no sea, no river to run to. And so I'm getting to a question. So as my mind leapt through all these crazy places, it made me want to ask you, or makes me want to ask you, who do you think's benefiting from all this, from keeping people, particularly Black people, halfway home with nowhere to go for refuge? Race, punishment, and the afterlife of mass incarceration. What's it all about, Professor Miller?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, who benefits? I think those things change from time to time and place to place. But we can think about. I mean, if we want to take like, if we want to think about material relations for a second, we can certainly see a benefit from, say, the many ancillary services that exist inside jails and prisons. This constant churn, the idea that a quarter of all prison admissions in a given year are due to probation and parole violations for things like missing an appointment with a probation or parole officer, what we might call pissing hot. So, did you drink? For many people, it's drinking. I remember for some time, one of the brothers I followed, not in the book, but one of the brothers I followed was on an alcohol tether because he wasn't allowed to drink. He got in trouble when he drank, and so they put him on an alcohol tether. Now, this is a grown person, Do you have marijuana in your system? But largely, did you miss appointments? Many people went back to jail, if not prison, often for doing things like missing appointments. Well, a quarter of all prison admissions each year are due to probation violations, parole violations, and probation. So we can think about the ancillary services that exist inside of prison. To make a phone call to my brother, it cost $6.55. That was after a series of reforms in the state of Michigan where he was incarcerated. It used to be twice that, 3 times that. This is a cell phone call, a collect call that it's not even a collect call. It's a prepaid phone call that I receive on my cell phone to the prison. Phone calls don't cost $6.55 to send an email. It costs at least $1.25 to send an email to my brother. So we can see a material benefit there. We could see a political benefit, especially during the tough on crime moment for folks who were talking about locking them up and throwing away the key. But there's also something interesting about bureaucratic routine. I think that once you get to law 35,000 out of the 45,000, that it becomes a part of muscle memory to exclude people that we've labeled criminal in this country. There's a presumption of a sense of safety that comes with punishing people, from excluding them, from not allowing them to fully participate in the political economy and culture. There's a politic of fear. There's a push for safety that matters in important ways that we have to reckon with. And of course, to be safe, we have to think of ways. We have to think of mechanisms to keep us safe from who? From those people who might harm us. And so there are multiple benefits from this system. It's a rational system. It makes sense for it to exist. Not rational as in it's right. Rational as in there's a logic to it. It makes sense. That's what I think. I think multiple people benefit in all kinds of ways. I think there's a kind of cultural cachet for pretending to be the right person who does the right thing, at the right time, for being in the right, and for castigating people who do wrong, and for telling people that it's their fault. But there's something else. It also justifies the social order. I mean, it so obviously justifies the social order. There are 19.6 million people with felony records, representing 1 in 3 currently living Black American men in this country. And we know how poverty and incarceration track. We know that 80% of prisoners are poor. We know that because of folks needing legal defense. They need public defenders, which means they have to declare indigence. They need a public defender. Half of all prisoners reported no income in the year before prison, and half of them will report no income for 3 years after their release. So these are exceptionally poor, exceedingly Black. About 38% of the prison is Black people. This system justifies the position that they're in society because the idea is that they're in this position for something that they did. Now, of course, we have to suspend the fact that we know that there have been over 2,000 exonerations since 1989. We have to suspend that. We have to suspend the fact that we know that we no longer incarcerate people for things that we incarcerated them for in the 90s and the 2000s. We have to suspend the fact that we're at a moment of, we're in something of a legitimacy crisis when we think about the system of punishment in the United States, where people are pushing for an abolition and at the very of jails and prisons and the society that produces them. But at the very least, there's a push for a rethinking of the entire enterprise. So anyway, long story short, there are many benefits to locking people up and throwing away the key. There's many benefits to this afterlife that we produce, what I call an afterlife of mass incarceration that we produce it. And it resonates across levels. There's a financial benefit, a political benefit, there's a cultural benefit to doing things this way, which is why it's so intransigent, which is why it's often so hard for us to imagine a different way altogether.
Yeah, I guess I'd like you to talk a little bit more about a few myths that you debunk and that you been debugging already in this conversation, and just a few things that I guess I want to lift up. One directly back to the title, about the afterlife of incarceration. And I'll say this even from the personal experience, the myth that once you're released, you're free, it's all good, right? Nothing about those 45,000 laws and regulations and the status of Simone that isn't just about when you're in prison. And another myth that you said about the system being not about justice, but about managing. And this is, again, the social hierarchy when we were just talking about to whose benefit, but managing our nation's populations. And one thing that you haven't talked as much about that I'd like you to touch on a little bit more is also the myth about our prison system being about rehabilitation, about preparing folks for the good lives after we get out. So let me let you hit some of those myths because you hit them hard in the book.
I appreciate that. I mean, so if we think about punishment ending after the prison, this is clearly untrue. There are 19,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target employment alone. 19,000. There are whole categories of employment for which people with criminal records need not apply. Then there's good character clauses. So this pertains to the number of licenses one might be able to get. You want to be a realtor? Not if you have a felony record. You want to groom a dog in the state of Illinois as of a few years ago. You may not if you have a felony record. You want to cut hair? Well, you couldn't in the state of Illinois until they passed a congressional act in 2016. You couldn't cut hair even if you were trained to cut hair in prison until 2016. It took a legislative act to allow people to become barbers. This is and cosmetologists. This is the world in which we live, and this is also a world in which men specifically, but men and women too, if we pay any attention to, for example, all the debates around welfare, derive one's sense of, we're taught to derive our sense of worth from our ability to provide for our families. We're taught that our sense of worth comes from our ability to make money, to provide from and into this world that is so work centric, I tell you, you may not work. And then I say, stay out of jail. Well, of course, we know that unemployment leads to crime. That's what it's a criminogenic risk. So say all the criminologists in the country. So what about housing? There are 1,000 housing regulations in this country. 1,000 housing regulations. What about your ability to spend time with your family? Well, there are thousands of laws, I think 3 or 4, that regulate who you can live with and how you spend time with your family. So I'll give you for example. If you've got a felony record, you may not live in a home with a child who's been adopted or with a foster child. Well, how does this shake out racially? We know that the child welfare system is disproportionately Black. I mean, of course, it's the poor more broadly, but it's also disproportionately Black. You may not even live in the home with the foster child if you've been convicted of a violent crime, which sounds reasonable until we look at the American jail or prison, where over half of all prisoners are parents and over half of all prisoners are in prison for a violent crime. But what about things like participation in politics? Let's think about basic ones like right to vote. In several states, of course, people don't have the right to vote. Most famously in Florida, people's right to vote was restored only after they pay all their court fines and fees, which stack up. They add up to the thousands, disenfranchising whole groups of people, hundreds of thousands of people, 750,000 people who got their right to vote restored, lost their right to vote within a few months because they implemented this having strictly to do with the fact that they can't afford to pay those fines and fees. But let's look at another area of civic participation when we talk about when you get out of prison, you're free. Think about another area of civic participation that we don't quite think about that directly contributes to our freedom: the ability to sit on a jury pool. the ability to sit on a jury. Well, in something like 30 states, a felony record is a borrowable, right? Like a thing. You can't sit on a jury. Therefore, you will never be tried by a jury of your peers in most states in this country. So no one who judges you will have had, not the lawyer in most cases, not the judge, of course, not the jury pool, will have ever been held in an American jail or prison, and will therefore have no sense of what it means to say, give a man 58 years or something like that, and so, or a woman or whomever. Well, so that's punishment extends and then there are laws on top of laws. So you get handed a sheet of paper called conditions of release that tell you must check in with your parole officer X amount of time. You may not cross state lines. You may not associate with known offenders. Well, in some neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, for example, we know that in some neighborhoods, 2/3 of the people who live in those neighborhoods have felony records. You may not associate with people who are known to have felony records. These are the kinds of laws you can't even enforce, but they're on the books anyway. And so anyway, so that's one thing. Prison is about rehabilitation. Well, we haven't been about rehabilitation since the 1970s. Not rhetorically, at least. We've shifted. There's books on the death of rehabilitation that are interesting and important to think about. But job placement programming has cut inside prisons. Employment being the engine of rehabilitation. At least that's where we thought about it. Have decreased by something like 60% in most states. The amount of job preparation services, job placement services is not even a thing anymore outside of American jails and prisons. Work release programs have all but gone away, and they've been replaced by something we talk about as prisoner reentry services, which some of these places are quite lovely, but this largely happens after you've released. It happens largely in community, and it's largely about preparing you for the worlds of work. It's not about making sure you get a job once you've had all this sort of workforce preparation, and so rehabilitation has all but disappeared. There was a third myth you asked me to take on, but it's not at hand right now.
I think you got it. I think you got him. I think you hit him. I think you definitely hit him between that and before. And I guess, so I don't want to be I'm going to be the annoying person in the crowd then, because there's always somebody who's going to ask this question. So I got to ask you the question. It's like, and I'm also the lawyer. It's like, you get all these thoughts, well, what can we do? What can we do about all this? And as a lawyer and advocate, I'm always concerned by, obsessed even by what we do to change this. And, at one point in your book, you say that you believe that it's not about hearts and minds. What matters is policy, about changing those 45,000 laws and regulations. Let's start with getting rid of them that deny people who've been locked up basic rights of citizenship. But you also feature, and you mentioned already earlier, Ronald, one of the guys you feature in the books, he says the opposite. He says that policy can revert back in a heartbeat. If we want things to change, we've got to change folks' hearts and minds. And I guess, over time, how have you reflected on this debate and this conversation you've had back and forth with Ronald, with whom you work?
Ronald is an incredible person, and his ears burn every time because I can't help but talk about Ronald and his experiences. So Ronald is wrongfully convicted and does 27 years in a Michigan penitentiary. While he's in, his son is murdered by a 14-year-old boy, and he advocates for his child's murderer. And I ask him why he did it. I'm thinking this is going to be a Lifetime movie. He's taking the son as his own son. He's taking the murder of his child as his own son, and he's gonna teach him in the way, and they're gonna have pizza together and Sunday dinners and travel the lecture circuit and talk about how they found each other or something like that. But that's not the story at all. Ronald forgave this child, though I don't know that he had to. Ronald advocated for this child. In fact, launched a campaign advocating with the judge, writing letter after letter to the judge, to the prosecutor, so that the child would be tried as a child, not an adult. He was going to be charged as an adult, something that happened in Michigan quite often, which meant his life would have been over. And I asked him why he did it. Did you love this boy? He didn't really love the boy. That's not the case. He did it because it was the right thing to do. He made an ethical commitment. And so when Ronald talks about changing hearts and minds, He's not talking about a feeling. You know, I may never get over my racism. You feel me? Like, I may never get over it. It doesn't matter how I feel. I need to write law and policy in such a way that I believe that there's a fully human participant in a human community on the other side of it. And so when he talks about changing hearts and minds, he's talking about people making an ethical commitment, no matter how hard it is, to make a world. I think this is my interpretation of what Ronald is telling me over these years that we spent together. To make a place where people, even people who cause us harm, might belong. He's pushing us for a politic of hospitality, a place that welcomes the stranger. To start from there, have I produced a situation where no one makes it home? Or am I working toward a situation where even people who cause us harm have a role, have a place, have a community? This is the heart and mind change that I think is necessary. It's a shift in how we do things. It's to move away from a politic of fear. It is to embrace vulnerability. I tried to model this in the writing of the book. This is part of why I'm in the book. It is kind of the take home message. It's like, man, if I let you close, I could get hurt. It's true. It's absolutely true.
So then, I mean, I'm going back to you for just a moment. I mean, you, like me, husband, a dad, and your son Jonathan is in high school now still, right? He's still in high school. Do you and him talk about your work, and what do you most want him to take from it? And I guess one of the things that, I mean, and I'm thinking about, we're not gonna get into, like, how our kids humble us and how our family members humble us. I'm sure they don't call you Dr. or Professor Miller at home. but one of the things that made me ask you this actually was your chapter on Black guilt. In all seriousness, a chapter that also deeply resonated with me, because that our children are presumed guilty, including in revered spaces like this, as you wrote, right place, wrong time. And I guess I want to know, how does this knowledge translate for you as a parent of a teenage son right here in this elite, predominantly white campus situated within the heart of Chicago's historic South Side, Black Chicago, the city where you grew up, and the dangers of just being young and Black in this space? What kind of conversations and how do you navigate that as a parent too? And maybe I'm just asking for advice.
That's something I'm probably really bad at, but what giving advice is saying. But what I'm hoping that he takes away from this is the commitment to a better world, despite the vulnerable situation that we're in. It's interesting. Black people in this country we're vulnerable. It just is the case. I mean, the poor are vulnerable for sure. Black people are vulnerable. Women are vulnerable. LGBTQ people, especially trans people, and especially trans people of color, are particularly vulnerable. The undocumented are vulnerable. So folks have had to wrestle with their vulnerabilities. But it is from these places that we see always incubating and always bubbling up a challenge and a commitment and a challenge to our sense of justice. A new definition of justice almost always comes from these places of deep vulnerability. And so what I hope my son takes away is, despite the things that you have every reason to fear, police who may murder you, it's just the case. It just is what it is. There was a Harith Augustus. I live a couple blocks from where Harith Augustus was murdered by police. And in that same neighborhood, and I live in South Shore, in that same neighborhood, 4 brothers were murdered by brothers. So there's vulnerability from without and vulnerability from within. That is the situation that we live in. But to always seek justice. What I hope he will do is what Ronald did, to seek for and advocate for justice from his position of vulnerability. Ronald advocated for that boy who killed his child from a prison cell under a wrongful conviction. This is the place of ethical commitment. This is the real stuff, where despite how you feel in a given moment, you're trying to make the world operate in such a way that it is more just, that there are places for people, even people who've caused us harm, to belong. That is a deep, hard position to occupy, but Ronald taught it best. Black folks have been teaching us the same lesson since Black folks have been here. LGBTQ people are teaching us right now. The undocumented are teaching us in powerful ways, if we care to listen, if we care to get close, if we care to allow ourselves to be moved by their stories and to be moved by the history that produced it. Like we'll see a way forward. And so I hope he gets that. At the same time, the vulnerability is real. Like this isn't some story like, oh, it's, happy-go-lucky, feel better, do justice, be, and everything's all good. No, it's not a peaceful story. Fred Hampton was murdered. He just was. That just is the case. Harith Augustus was murdered. He just was. Laquan McDonald was murdered. Thank God for your work. He just was. Like that's the world that we live in. Those are the vulnerabilities that you have to reckon with. Those are real live things. And they're brothers who shoot because they want to, not because they're hungry. And they're brothers who shoot because they're hungry. The world is complicated, super messy. And so to be within that, and to allow yourself to experience that fully, to not rob yourself of those even fears, and despite them, to make the choice to do the ethical thing. That's what I want my son to take from my work, from that research we get from the brothers he spent hours with, who come to our house to eat regularly and hang out with us. When we go visit, Ron is Uncle Ron. He what's up, nephew? He's on the phone with John. What's up, nephew? Like learn something from that brother. Learn something from me. Learn something from your own experiences. Don't shy away from it. Don't run. Sit in it. Feel it. All the pain of it and the joy of it. There's deep joy there too.
Man, unfortunately, I think we hit time. Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller, halfway home. Face punishment and the afterlife of mass incarceration. But seriously, thank you, brother. I wish everyone here, if we were all here in person, I'd say let's give it up for Professor Miller. Let me kick it to Denise to take it home from my house. But thank you, brother, for your work, this conversation. I'm coming away, I hope, smarter, more ethical, and I'd like to be your high school son. My kids are jealous right now. They're being like, man, why don't you say anything like that, Dad? You never said anything like that. So thank you, man.
This has been my great pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
All right, let's kick it to Denise to close us out.
Thank you to Professor Reuben Jonathan Miller and to Professor Craig Futterman for an interesting conversation today. And my thanks to all of you for joining us for this year's Alumni Weekend celebration. Thank you. So
I'll just at least really want to thank everyone for tuning in. Join us also at International House. And we truly appreciate all the support that you give. And I got to give a plug and hold up the book. Like I said at the beginning, if you haven't read the book by now, you're messing up. Get it, buy it. It's beautiful and powerful, and it's something that I think that everybody needs to read, all of us and all of our kids. So thank you from International House, and look forward to joining you soon. Take care, everybody.